dysbiosis, problems with the microbiome that can be easily fixed with food, okay, are associated with depression, schizophrenia, and even autism.
Give us the overarching your overarching dietary philosophy. What are the kinds of things that we should be looking for when pushing our shopping carts through the supermarket? What are the kinds of, you could take it at the level of food category or individual foods that really excite you. And what are the kinds of foods that we should be steering clear from if we want to keep angiogenesis within a nice, healthy range in our bodies?
Yeah, we spent time talking about angiogenesis, but let me kind of back up for 1 second before I go into, kind of hyperspeed to kind of share with you how I think about shopping in a grocery store, for example, and what to choose and what to stay away from. First of all, when it comes to food and health, it's not just about the food. It's about how our body responds to what you put inside it. That's how, doctors think about drugs. Whatever you put into your body, there's got to have an effect in the body. And so, out there you hear all the marketing about this superfood or this super supplement. I can tell you there's no such thing as a single superfood or super supplement. If you want to call it something super, it's the human body. It's pretty awesome and amazing on what it can do. And what it can do best, better than anything else, and what we inherited when we kind of emerged from our mom's womb, is the ability to resist disease. It is a result of your body's hardwired health defense systems that we're born with. From the day we're born to our very last breath, we've got at least 5 health defense systems that I write about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease. Angiogenesis, our circulation, is one of our health defense systems. Good circulation, good health. Out of control circulation, cancer, macular degeneration, et cetera, et cetera. Second health defense system is our stem cells that are in our bone marrow that can come flying out to regenerate our organs slowly every single day. We're actually repairing and replacing ourselves, regenerating, not like a salamander or a starfish, like we can't grow back an arm or a leg, not yet. But one of the things that we can do is we can replenish aging and kind of like slightly kind of worn out organs. And in the same way that foods can actually cut off extra blood vessels and grow good ones, there are certain foods that can actually help prompt and recruit stem cells into the circulation to be able to help accelerate our regenerative properties. Like foods that can cause regeneration is quite an amazing concept. Our microbiomes, our third health defense system, our healthy gut bacteria. A lot of people talk about the microbiome, and it's one of the pillars, 5 pillars of my concept that I talk about in terms of healthy food, because the foods that we eat can either harm our microbiome, our gut bacteria, which then harms our immune system, harms our brain neurotransmitter system, harms our ability to heal. Okay, our bacteria really control a lot of these, influence a lot of these healthy systems. And if you feed the bacteria with things that they like, you nurture your bacteria like you'd feed your dog or your cat or your bird, and you treat them well, your bacteria become really vibrant, and they actually help our brain and our immune system and lower inflammation and help our metabolism. Fourth one's our DNA, fourth health defense system, which we think it's, everybody thinks of genetic code as DNA. Turns out our DNA protects us against the environment in ways that we hadn't even thought about. For example, you're pumping gas. If you still drive a gas car, I always ask people, do you stand upwind or downwind of the pump? And people look at me and say, well, why are you even asking that question? And I say, if you can smell the fumes of the gasoline, you are standing downwind. And those solvent vapors in your lungs are causing DNA mutations. Why don't you get lung cancer right away or the next day? Because your body's DNA is protecting your health by fixing itself when it's damaged. You're out there in traffic, with the window down on a sunny day in the summertime, you're not lying out on the beach, you're not in the sun tanning booth, but you are getting that sun on your arm. That's causing DNA damage on your skin. So how come you don't get skin cancer only in your left arm when your arm's out the window? Because the DNA is being fixed. So foods, you can eat foods, including carotenoids, that can help speed up your DNA fixing itself. And so that's really, when you ask about what's my framework, my concept, It's not only about the food, it's about how your body responds to it. So there's no single food. In fact, I write about more than 200 foods that you can easily find in the grocery store. Most of them in the perimeter of the grocery store, in the fruits and plant-based section, but also in the seafood section for those people who actually still eat seafood. And although we were told to avoid the middle aisle, it turns out that there's a lot of really good things in the middle aisle. Beans, whether they're dried or canned, tree nuts, really great for the microbiome. It's got good healthy fats. Olive oil, right? There's certain olive oils, 3 varietals, monovarietals from Italy, Spain, and Greece. I can tell you what they are: the Cornecchi, the Moriolo, and Piccio olives. If you can get monovarietal olive oils, they have the highest levels of cancer-starving anti-angiogenic polyphenols. So I have a great time going into the middle aisle. I'm very selective. I ignore all that ultra-processed stuff and the candy bars and the weird colored chips, but I know what I'm going for. And so really my whole philosophy is know what you like, what you love to eat, know where it's located at the grocery store. When you get in that store, make a beeline for it. Kind of ignore all the marketing stuff. Go for the carrots if you like the carotenoids, or the red bell peppers, or the kale, or the radicchio. Like I love that kind of stuff. And then if you're going to go into the middle aisle, make sure you've got some good healthy oils. You got some nuts and beans and all those kinds of things that are good for you. Spices, dried spices, also good for you.
I love that. It sounds like the dietary pattern that you recommend is pescatarian, is like a sort of Mediterranean pescatarian hybrid. Would that be an accurate statement?
My approach is really flexible. So if you're pescatarian, it works. If you're vegetarian, it works. If you're a vegan, it works. And if you are somebody who is an omnivore and you eat pretty much everything, what I tell you is that if you spend most of your time eating foods that actually build up your health defense systems, the stuff that's not so good for you that you should ignore. So what are those? Eating a lot of red meat, which you should cut down or cut out. Eating ultra processed foods, taking in sugar sweetened beverages, and also eating artificial sweeteners. Those things are definitely not good for your health defenses. Like the research has shown, they take down and damage angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, impair your DNA, and they take down your immunity as well. So there are clearly things that actually are not so good for you to eat, not so much because they're intrinsically evil, but when you put them in your body doesn't respond well to them.
What would you say is the primary problem, or maybe there are more than one, with red meat? Is it the saturated fats?
So it's a great question. Everybody tries to pin things on saturated fats, and there's a controversy now about saturated fats. Some people say they're not necessarily as bad as they're not. You don't want to demonize them. They play their role as well. I think that part of the issue about a heavy meat diet is really the overage of eating meat, and by the way, that meat is treated in factory farming. Also doesn't actually help the quality of the meat, the antibiotic laced foods, meats, the way they're treated. And because some animals are actually fattened up with steroids and other, artificial things, you're not really getting a pure food. You're getting a doctored food in a way that's not so good for you. We do know, by the way, that eating preserved meats, which I didn't put on my list, but not just red meat, but preserved meats, the deli meats, the things that we probably all grew up with, as kids, you get a piece of bologna, you put it between 2 pieces of white bread and put some, artificial mayonnaise on. Everybody has had that experience, right? At least in this country, that kind of experience. And we know that artificial processed meats are actually rated by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen. And all the data shows that people who eat a lot of processed meats. I'm not talking about the naturally processed meats, like the salamis and things hanging in the air in Italy or Sardinia. I'm talking about the mass produced stuff that you get at the grocery store. That's not good for you. And so I think that let's focus. This is what I tell people. Let's focus on the things that you love that are good for you.
Yeah.
Let's find ways to make them as tasty as possible.
I love that you qualified that, because I mean, honestly, when I see, when I read the statement from the World Health Organization, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it's the bologna that people are eating, in between the two slices of white bread with the mayo, with the soda, with the bag of Sun Chips on the side. It's like, it's the milieu.
Exactly.
It's not,
Exactly.
and I'm not saying that meat is good for you either, but it would be
Yeah,
impossible
and
in
that,
my view.
well, it's just like the lectin story, or
Yeah.
like it's so easy to try to find a culprit and then paint them as most wanted, and then send a vigilante team to go hunt them down. Like it's not that simple.
Yeah, I agree. If you are opting to, because you're absolutely right about the factory farm system, if you do incorporate meat into your diet, red meat specifically, what do you look out for?
I try to get uh, what I call kind of conscientiously raised meats.
Hmm.
I care about the planet and I care about animals, and so I think that if you're going to go for meat, get meat that's done properly, raised properly.
Right.
And and just a little side comment that I usually I don't try to tell people what not to do. I try to encourage people what to do that they enjoy.
Right.
But I will tell you, I scratched my head a little bit about these plant-based burgers that are genetically engineered and they're ultra processed a lot of times. And it's like, look, man, if you really love a burger, and you got to eat a burger, and that's what you really love, take good care of your body, eat really good stuff that supports your health defense systems most of the time. And then if you're going to eat a burger, get the best friggin' burger you can find with the best quality of meat, and just go for it. Knock yourself out. Just don't do it all the time.
I love that. You talked about foods that can help us regenerate our tissues, our organs, with the help of stem cells that we produce endogenously. What are some of those regenerative foods?
Yeah. So, first of all, just so that everyone knows how we know that our bodies regenerate, we have stem cells that actually live in our bone marrow. They're kind of like bees living inside a hive. And when our organs or tissues need to be repaired or regenerated, they send a signal to our bone marrow. The bone marrow is kind of like the brown stuff. If you break a chicken bone and you can see in the middle of it, that's all. That's all. Those are all stem cells. We actually were made from stem cells in the womb. The leftovers are just packed into our bone marrow and a few other places. And when there's a signal that your organ needs to be repaired, basically the damaged area sends a text message to your bone marrow and says, "Hey, I need a few stem cells. Come on." And what happens is that that message will send out the stem cells into your bloodstream and your genesis like bees coming out of a hive. And those bees they make a beeline literally right for that organ and repair it, replace it. It's pretty amazing. A lot of people don't know this, but if you had your liver, some of our organs really regenerate. If you had a liver problem and I removed 2/3 of your liver, most of it, the rest of it, a third, will grow right back, the rest of it right back. If I clipped off the top of your lung, it would just regenerate, grow right back. And like, people go, whoa, I didn't know that. But guess what? Our hair grows back. Our skin grows back. You got a little dandruff on, it's because their skin's falling off, the old stuff being replaced by stem cells. So what are the foods that can actually help augment, boost, activate, amplify this process? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. One of my favorite ones is to talk about is dark chocolate, cacao, which is a fruit pod, actually, and dried and usually fermented. Cacao has all these polyphenols, and some of the cacao polyphenols, which are called proanthocyanidins, actually have been shown when they're given in dark chocolate, like really dark, high flavanol cocoa. Okay, specifically, the study was done with hot chocolate made with ultra dark chocolate, high flavanol cacao. You give it. There was a study in people who are older, 60s, with heart disease. Okay, they had bad circulation, bad hearts, and they gave them just 2 cups of hot cocoa to have a day for 30 days. At baseline, they measure their stem cells in the bloodstream. So we can actually withdraw a blood, like you go to a doctor's office, and we can count the stem cells in your bloodstream under a microscope. Okay, so we know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We know exactly what you started out with baseline. Everyone with heart disease starts out with fewer stem cells. That's probably why in part why you have the heart disease. You're not repairing yourself fast enough. 30 days of having 2 cups a day of hot cocoa with high flavonols, like dark chocolate, it doubled the number of stem cells in your bloodstream. And when you actually measure the blood flow using a blood pressure cuff and an ultrasound, it doubled the improvement. It basically improved your blood flow as well. So again, powerful stuff, and nailed right down to the stem cells. Barley can also do it. And there's also even a substance in fruit peel called ursolic acid. Ursolic acid is found in the peel of apples and peaches and cranberries. And it's really hard to eat, or apricots, really hard to eat a lot of fruit skin. Like, doesn't sound that appetizing. But if you get dried fruit, I don't know if I would regularly eat 6 whole apricots, but I could easily eat 6 dried apricots a day. Okay. So lots of easy ways of actually getting fruit peel or ursolic acid. That also helps to regenerate your organs.
Is it not true that some of the most polyphenol rich foods in the supermarket we know that they're, of course, produce, but that they're bitter. They tend to be bitter or sour. Herbs, spices, dark chocolate, coffee, tea, wine, really sort of, because these compounds, correct me if I'm wrong, they're generated as plant defense compounds, which are not toxic to us in the doses that they appear in our diets, but their tastes generally are meant to ward off smaller organisms.
Yeah, the plants, Mother Nature put these bioactive chemicals, okay, which is what all these things are, carotenoids and polyphenols. Mother Nature kind of put them into the plant to protect the plant. The plant protects itself, and it's a little bitter, a little sour, or a little, floral, or whatever it is, because insects don't like that scent, right? So it's actually like natural insecticide. And so when humans started to eat plant-based foods, those natural plant defenses suddenly had a new job description.
Mm-hmm.
They had to interact with our human cells. And I think that's where over evolution, over tens of thousands of years, we intuitively started to figure out which foods are actually better for us. And so we are not the only generation that has talked about how good plant-based foods are. I mean, this goes back, probably back to the troglodytes. They understood how important it was to eat, fiber-rich plant-based foods. I think we're rediscovering at a much deeper level and understanding with science why it's so important.
So, do people who advocate for the carnivore diet just make you cringe? Like, what's your take on that?
No, you know what? Listen, I have I take the long view towards things. First of all, I regard food as something that's very intimate. It's one of the most intimate parts of our lives. Why? Because when you think about food, everyone has some association with the smells and the tastes of what in the house you grew up in, what your mom cooked, right? Your relatives, your holidays, and it tells us something about our communities and our culture. And in this country, we all came from someplace, and so everybody has their own unique influences. And I think that's wonderful, because in every culture that you can get food in, there are elements, there are ingredients that are actually been shown to be plant-based and healthy. Sometimes it's seafood-based, and not just fish, but even shellfish. You can pick your way through more than 200 different ingredients that are good for you. Look, most people before the middle of the last century, before the middle of the 20th century, were not eating a lot of meat. They didn't have the money. The meat wasn't scaled up to the factory farming. It wasn't that easy to get access. Transportation wasn't that great. And so people were naturally had more abundance of plant-based foods and seafood if you live near the shore. And it was much harder to get meat. And if you go to other countries, like certain places in Asia or certain places in Latin America and many places in Europe, the natural agrarian tendencies of communities is easier to grow and easier to get plants. And I think what's happened is that we've lost this connection with our planet, frankly. And so, you just wheel your thing into the meat section of the grocery store. You can start, just putting packages, shrink wrap plastic packages into your grocery and freeze it. That's not how we used to live. And so I think what we're just kind of getting back to common sense is, okay, like some people think meat tastes really good, some people really crave it. But honestly, the body of evidence, science evidence, but also kind of the tradition of humanity. We usually ate mostly plant-based foods, and for people along the shore, adding a lot of seafood, that's all better for you. Let's get back to basics, and I think that's what we need to do: is strip ourselves down a little bit away from the industrialization and think about our own bodies.
Yeah, I love that. I love plants and I love not plants. I love both. So I'm definitely right there with you. You mentioned the microbiome briefly, which we haven't
Mhm.
really talked about in quite some time on the podcast. Do you want to, for listeners that are maybe unfamiliar with the concept of the microbiome, the gut microbiome specifically, go into that a little bit, and then I guess let's talk about how to nurture that aspect of our health.
Yeah, such an important topic because our microbiome, our gut bacteria, which I'll explain in a second, really helps to influence, lowers inflammation in our body, helps to boost our healthy, protective immune system, and also powerfully influences our metabolism, how well we use glucose in our body and our insulin sensitivity, and also amazingly triggers signals through one of the big nerves in our body, the vagus nerve, into our brain, and influences neurotransmitters, which actually influences our mood. So here's the microbiome. Microbiome is our gut bacteria. And when I went to medical school many years ago, we were frankly taught that bacteria are bad, kill bacteria, must kill bacteria, right? And that's where everybody learns how to bust out their prescription bed and write antibiotics. Well, it turns out that our gut has most of the bacteria in our body, and most of our gut bacteria is healthy bacteria, good bacteria. In fact, we've got about 40 trillion cells, human cells in our body, the cells that make up our heart and our brain, our lungs, and our face and everything else. We've got 39 trillion bacteria. Okay.
Wow.
So almost a one-to-one. We're about half bacteria and half human. There's even a term, Max, for this. For an organism that's composed of multiple organisms, an ecosystem that's composed of multiple organisms, is called a holobiont, HOLOBIONT. Doesn't sound as cool as being a cyborg, which is part machine and part human, but part bacteria and part other organism, part human. We're holobionts. We're not even fully human anymore, right? So if our gut bacteria protect us, okay, and there's lots of different kinds. Recently, there's been some discoveries that there are tens of thousands of new viruses discovered in our gut that are not dangerous viruses like the one that causes COVID, or HIV, but healthy viruses that actually keep bad bacteria from overgrowing. So, we don't even want to get rid of all the viruses. We coexist with all these really important organisms in our body. And we've got to, and what are these, by the way, in health, what do they do? When we feed our gut bacteria, when we feed ourselves, our human cells absorb the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, all the things that we need. And then again, when I was in medical school, we were taught, like fibrous foods, our body doesn't absorb them. It just passes it down to the colon. And because they kind of irritate the colon, it keeps you moving regularly. You go regularly, so to speak. The old prune juice thing. It turns out that's not quite true. After we get fed first, okay, that leftover stuff that our human cells don't absorb goes to feed the bacteria. And so every meal we have, we're feeding our human cells and our bacterial cells. And again, very important, when we feed our bacteria good things, they thrive. And when they thrive, what do? They actually produce metabolites, their own metabolites. They're called short chain fatty acids, or SCAFAs. There's a lot of science to this, but the most important thing is that when we feed our gut bacteria well, they have their own metabolism. And what they kick out as part of their metabolism are these little fatty acids that are healthy. What do the healthy fatty acids do? They're released from the gut. They go into our bloodstream. They lower body inflammation. They help our own muscles and cells use glucose more effectively. They effectively help to prevent diabetes. They maintain our blood pressure. And again, they speed up wound healing. They even keep our hair and our skin in good, healthy shape. And they can stimulate neurotransmitters like GABA, serotonin, oxytocin. Oxytocin, by the way, is a social hormone. When you've been isolated in quarantine and then finally get to see your friends and family again, like you just have this rush. That rush is your brain producing oxytocin. It's the same hormone, by the way. When you get a good kiss, your brain releases oxytocin. When you see somebody you love, same thing. The brain also has this massive surge of oxytocin during orgasm. Okay, that's how important this is. Our gut bacteria helps to control that. So when we do good by our gut bacteria, they do good by us, and they help us relieve our stress as well. So dysbiosis, which is a problem with our gut bacteria, undoes all those things. Raises inflammation, which is the opposite. Lowers our protective immunity, which is not what we want. Mucks around and screws up our metabolism, so our glucose goes up, heading towards that diabetic state. Our healing, our ability to heal wounds goes down. Our skin doesn't look good. Our hair doesn't look good. And our brain neurotransmitters aren't functioning. And that's why dysbiosis, problems with the microbiome that can be easily fixed with food, okay, are associated with depression, schizophrenia, and even autism.
That is fascinating. So when it comes to feeding the microbiome, is it as simple as just eating more fiber? Or are there certain kinds of fibers or a certain array of fibers, or are there certain phytochemicals that we want to look for, non-fiber phytochemicals?
No, it's a great question. So I'm the first person that always at the party to tell people when there's a conversation about microbiome, I'm going to put my honest scientist hat on, because everybody's talking about the microbiome like it's a done deal. We know exactly what to do, and we can do precision nutrition by measuring your stool. As a scientist, I can tell you we are just scratching the tip of the iceberg of this new entire field that we barely understand how important the gut bacteria actually is. But what we have discovered is it's incredibly important. So, and what are some ways that we know already that we can actually do good by the food that we eat for our bacteria? Well, we can actually do prebiotics, which is fiber. Soluble fiber is really good. So what's a great source of soluble fiber? Mushrooms. Most people don't realize it, but mushrooms have great soluble fiber. It's called beta-D-glucan, and it's present in the caps of the mushroom. You buy some white button mushrooms at the grocery store. Most people cut off the stems and the caps, but guess what? Sustainability is really important. Mother Nature is really resourceful. So she put, guess what, twice the amount of beta-glucans in the mushroom stem as in the caps. So don't throw away the mushroom stem. Eat that too. Find a way to do it. You don't like the way it looks, put it into a blender, make it into soup. Okay. It's a great way to actually change it with mushrooms. Other types of fiber, like tree nuts, have great fiber for your microbiome. So when you eat a walnut, although it's got some healthy fats, those fibers actually go right down to feed your gut. Here's how powerful the gut responds to good fiber is that it boosts your immune system, and your immune system not only prevents invaders from the outside, like bacteria and viruses, from tackling us, but they also prevent invaders from the inside. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about cancer. Cancer is an invader from the inside that our immune system consistently conducts surveillance to try to figure out, like, is there a bad guy there? Should I be taking it out? It's like our internal SWAT team, trying to, as snipers, like trying to take out the bad guys if they find a cancer. Well, there's an amazing study of 700 people with stage 3 colon cancer. It's pretty advanced. And this is coming from the big universities from the East Coast and the West Coast and the Southeast. And they found that in people with stage 3 colon cancer, getting treatment. So this is not about some magic food instead of like getting real treatment with an oncologist, that those people who ate 2 handful of tree nuts, walnuts, pecans, macadamias, pine nuts, whatever, they actually had a 50% decrease in mortality. That's huge. You can't get that with a drug or a pill, but just by modulating your microbiome, you can actually completely change things. Now, that's one way, is feeding the fiber. Another way to treat is to treat your gut bacteria well, is that you can, there are certain bacteria that love to grow in mucus. So, we've got mucus in our mouth. We've also got mucus in our colons. Okay. And some bacteria, there's one particular bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila. The muciniphila gives it away. It loves to live in mucus. And Akkermansia is I think that's a bacteria that we're going to start to hear over and over and over again over the next couple of decades. This is a guardian bacteria that helps our body lower the risk of cancer. So a study by a colleague of mine, Dr. Laurence Zitvogel in France, looked at 200 people with cancer being treated with immune therapies. This is like really space age therapies, tip of the spear, that actually don't kill the cancers directly, but wake up our immune system so our immune system can go after the cancers. Now, here's the thing about immunotherapies. And again, I'm one of these doctors that can talk on both sides of the aisle in terms of both the medicines as well as the diet. Turns out that only works well in about 20% of people. So 80% of people, most people don't get the response you want. And so the Laurent Zitvogel basically said, let's line up everybody, 200 people, and let's figure out what makes the difference between a responder and a non-responder. And she looked at everything, genetics and weight and sex and everything else. Only one difference between the responders and the non-responders is the microbiome. And of the microbiome differences, the responders had one bacteria, Akkermansia, that the non-responders did not have. Now, if you had a cold and you got a Z-Pack to treat your bronchitis, for example, that'll wipe out your Akkermansia for a little while. So you can grow back. And so what she did is she found if you grew back the Akkermansia in the lab and you treated tumors with the immunotherapy, you could take a non-responder and convert it into a responder. And so what are some ways of growing Akkermansia? Because you can't eat that as a probiotic yet. You can actually get more mucus to your gut to secrete more mucus. What's a good way to do that? Turns out that the elagitannins, bioactives, present in pomegranates, present in cranberries, and present in Concord grapes, they actually just kind of tickle your gut to secrete more mucus. I had a patient once who had a blood cancer, and she was going to get this immunotherapy, but she had just had a bronchitis, and I told her, I said, look, check your Akkermansia. So we checked her stool, 0, Z. Now we know from this research that Laurent Zitvogel did that stacks the odds against you. So I said, before we start it, let's go ahead and get you on some pomegranate juice, just 8 ounces will do it. And then we measured her after 3 weeks, and she had 3 times above the normal population of Akkermansia, great mucus. And then she got this immunotherapy and became like one of the best responders ever seen in this medical center, and is alive and doing well today. So that's how powerful the microbiome can be. Another way of nurturing is actually having the mucus secreted. And then of course there's the probiotics, which is just eating the bacteria, and you can get probiotic pills. I think the jury's out on which one's the best one and how well they work. But if you can have fermented foods, you're eating a lot of natural, healthy bacteria, yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut. Recently, I was at a farmer stand, and I was in Pennsylvania Dutch country, going to the farmer stands, and I'm like, wow, some homemade sauerkraut. So I bought it and I ate some, and man, it was just absolutely delicious. I don't like the big factory produced versions. They just don't sit well with me, but this homemade stuff was really, really great. So fermented food is another way of actually doing it.
Yeah, we really need to undo decades of bad advice. And when you were talking about, the drive to consume breakfast and snack all day, it made me realize how complicit the food industry and governmental regulatory agencies are in the obesity epidemic. Because if you look around, if you wander through the aisles of the modern supermarket, you're going to see health claims on cereals, on granola bars, on instant oatmeals, on all of the packaged crap that have tons of added sugar to them. But you're never going to see health claims on a dozen eggs, or on an avocado, or on a piece of steak, for that matter. So your average consumer walks through the supermarkets intending on eating a healthful diet. They see all the red heart healthy logos on the cereals, on the granola bars. It's no wonder that's what Americans are mostly consuming.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's like things like red meat, for example. It's like, we talk about this, red meat, like because red meat is new to our diet. Is that why? Like, we haven't been eating red meat for the last, million years. Like, our body sort of knows what to do when you eat meat. Like, it knows how to handle it without getting sick, because you can't eat that much meat. Like, it makes you full. It's very satiating. Like, it's very hard to overeat meat. It's you have to process it to get that real, overeating sort of syndrome. So same with eggs, right? It's like we demonized eggs for so long, right? Whole fat dairy, we demonized butter, we demonized, right? And it's decades, right? From the 70s. And this was also a very sad story, right? So we said, oh, butter is high in saturated fat, it's going to cause heart attacks. It's like, but don't you realize that we've been eating butter for several millennia without causing heart disease? And now in 1970, it causes heart disease. But anyway, so we demonized butter, which was high in saturated fat, but it was a natural fat, so it wasn't that bad for you. Then we told people to eat margarine, right? And that's where Becel and all these other things came out. Turns out, of course, to make it spreadable and stuff, they used a lot of trans fats, where actually they were killing you, right? They caused tons of heart disease. So I think there's one study that estimated that switch from butter to margarine caused about 100,000 heart attacks per year in the United States. So think about this for a second. This misguided race to go low fat so that we would have less heart attacks actually caused more heart attacks. Right? A lot more heart attacks, because we switched from the natural fat, which was butter, to margarine with trans fats, which actually were causing a lot of heart disease. Like, we know that now. That wasn't so evident in the 70s and 80s. But it's one of these things where it's this hubris that we think we can do better than nature. Right? We're smarter than nature. Like, we can make a better breast milk than breast milk, right? It's like, come on, that's ridiculous. Our bodies have evolved for breast milk. And now, of course, and this was, again, in the 70s, 80s, people were being fed formula, even though mothers were perfectly fine, had perfectly, adequate sources of breast milk. They were fed formula because there was this whole idea that it was better. Of course, it took decades of that before finally people said, hey, breast milk's actually quite good for you. There's all kinds of good stuff in here. So then we've gone back to breast is best and so on. But it's the same idea, right? We have the same thing with foods. We can make more foods healthier by processing the hell out of them so that we can fit some pre-specified notion of low carb, low fat, high fat, whatever.
Yeah.
And we can make a better food than what is naturally there. And it's like, we can't. Don't think that you can, because this is just the way we've grown up. And it's not that there's something intrinsically wrong. It's just, I say, it's like, I use something called the parable of the cow. So two cows one day are, talking, and they're saying, hey, did you see the latest nutrition evidence says that we should be eating meat? Of course, the diet was done on lions, so the cows start eating meat, then they die. And then the lions come in and say, hey, did you see the latest studies that say grass is the best? Of course, the study was done on cows, right? And then they start eating grass and die. But the point is that you have to eat the foods that you evolved with. It's not that anything's intrinsically good or bad. It's the foods that we eat. So if we haven't evolved to eat margarine, that margarine is probably going to do us a lot of harm, which it did. If you are evolved to eat butter, then the butter probably is not going to do you much harm. And it wasn't. So it took us literally from the 70s to the 2010s, the mid 2010s, before butter was sort of acceptable, right? It was even through the 2000s. Avocados were like, whoa, why the heck are you eating avocados? Why are you eating olive oil, right? That took decades for us to get back there. Right? If we had just said, look, if it's natural, if it's unprocessed, if it's a traditional food, it's probably okay. If it's not, and that includes beef, that includes, meat and stuff, right? But if it's not, then it's probably not okay. And that's sort of the most important factor. But again, it gets lost because the food industry doesn't make that much money. Like if you sell broccoli, you sell broccoli. You can't, put it in a box and try and upsell it for twice the price.
Yeah. I mean, stalks of broccoli don't have a big glaring red heart on them in the supermarket begging you to eat them. But you walk through the aisles, which is where we know all the ultra processed foods lie in wait. There's health claim after health claim.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. And that's where I started when I was writing the obesity code, sort of got to where it's like, look, we got to like start to educate people on the basics of nutrition, and, you know, fasting is part of that, because it had gone so far, as we were talking about, oh, you know, there's all these things like tracking your macros, right? It's huge. So you have to have this percentage fat and this percentage. It's like, but that's not the way we eat. We eat foods. Like you don't know what percentage carbs a cauliflower is unless you look it up. So what you need to do is really focus on the foods. But even then, that's sort of the minority. What you get taught in medical school is number of calories, you know, percentage fat, percentage carbs. You know, it's like that's the wrong thing. Like, is it natural? That's all you need to know. Are you eating constantly? If you are, then you'll probably gain weight. If you're not, then you probably won't be gaining weight.
What are the qualities of these ultra processed foods that make them so prone to driving hunger, obesity, chronic disease?
I think it's because it sort of bypasses a lot of our natural satiety signals. And so when you eat natural foods, there are hormones that go up. So you eat steak, for example, and certain hormones will go up. So cholecystokinin in response to dietary fat, and PYY in response to protein. So when you reach a certain point, your body says enough, that you're full, like don't eat anymore. And it's not easy to overcome that. And that's why you have those restaurants that will say, oh, eat this 60-ounce steak and we'll give it to you free. They're not giving out a lot of free steaks because it's just really hard to keep eating when you're full. That's the same thing you see in the all-you-can-eat restaurants. So everybody's gone to one of those. You're completely full. And, you know, if somebody slaps down 2 pieces of like pork chop, you'll be like, you know, I'm going to throw up. Right. But those are the same pork chops that you ate at the beginning of the meal perfectly fine. So it's not to do with the pork chop. It's the fact that your hormones are just basically screaming at you to stop. And we have that for all natural foods because we've evolved to eat. So if you eat vegetables, for example, it's got bulk. And so it fills up your stomach, and then that sends out signals. Stretch receptors in the stomach will send out the signals, stop, don't eat. So for example, if you have people with bezoars, which is hair, like, so some people, you know, or cats or something, they'll you know, ingest hair accidentally, and their stomachs will fill up. They actually can't eat because their stomach is just full of hair. So, and the stretch receptors will tell your body, hey, stop eating, stop eating. So if you're eating something which is very bulky, like salads or something like that, you can't just keep eating them. Once you start processing foods, you can get rid of those things that make you stop eating. And it's very highly profitable to do so, of course, because you want people, if you're trying to sell product, you want people to eat. So what you do when you make a cookie, for example, is you take white flour. So what you do is you take out all the fat in it, right? So flour is almost pure carbohydrate. You've taken out all the fat, you've taken out all the proteins. So you have nothing that actually makes you full. You can keep eating that almost indefinitely. You also take out all the fiber. So all that bulk that you get with the wheat or whatever, like you don't have that anymore. So there's no bulk, there's no fat, there's no protein. Well, there's no satiety signaling at all. So if you think about that all-you-can-eat buffet, you can't eat those 2 pork chops, but you could eat a cookie for dessert, right? Because there's no satiety signaling there. You could drink some Coke, which is pure sugar. There's a lot of calories there, but there's nothing that is going to scream at you to stop taking it. So you don't. And that's why ultra processed foods, and there's studies on this, always lead to overeating because there's no natural brakes on that system. And even if you're not hungry, even if you're completely full, you can still take them down. So if you are full and you're not hungry and somebody says, oh, but you must eat to lose weight, so go have something, you're not going to get yourself a pork chop. 1, because it's hard to, because you have to go fry it up. But 2, you don't want that. Your body is going to say, oh, I'm nauseated. It's like, if you have lunch and then somebody says, oh, you have to eat a snack at 2:30, you're not going to get yourself a porterhouse steak. So you're going to go get some highly processed food like a low fat muffin or a cookie or a granola bar. And that's what's going to happen. So the two things is that one, it leads to overeating in terms of the quantity, and two, it leads to overeating in terms of the frequency in which you do it. So, both of those are bad. Like when you're full, your body is telling you don't need to eat. I'm using up the stuff that's coming in. Don't put any more in, right? Just use it up. But now if you need to force something down because of our sort of misguided teachings for the last sort of 30 years, then you're not going to be able to take down something natural. You're going to have to take down something highly processed. But that was the problem in the first place. So you get down that low fat muffin, but it ain't doing you any favors because, your body's just it's got more to deal with.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I see you sometimes butt heads with people in the fitness community who love to promote the idea that, or at least imply that calories are all that matter when it comes to weight loss or weight gain for that matter. Could you give us a sense of that sort of conflict? I believe it's really kind of, there are some that just promote this idea that so long as you're tracking your calories, you can eat whatever you want. And then there are others that I guess promote the idea that that's actually, a reductionist approach that doesn't really take into account the full breadth of how foods affect hormones and as a result drive feelings of hunger, satiety, and the like. Give us the lay of the land of that sort of conflict, which seems to be, always going on in social media nutrition discourse.
Yeah, it's always the fitness people, and I generally don't engage with them, but they like to attack me anyway. Because what I'm trying to do is try and give people more nuanced approach, and you see this with doctors too. They say, "Oh, calories is all that matters." It's like, okay, but that's a very simplistic approach because what's important is the calories. There's calories, but what's more important is what's controlling how many calories we take, right? So calories is sort of a proximate cause, whereas you need to look at the ultimate cause. If you're always hungry and that's where you're taking more calories, well, that is a problem. Right? Yes, it's still the calories that are the problem, but not. And it also gives you this idea that all calories are the same. All calories are going to produce the same satiety. For example, they don't. They're nothing alike. You could drink 1,000 calories of some sugary drink and get zero satiety out of that. So how is it calories? Yes, if you decide to, count your calories down to the last one, you think that you can lose weight, but almost nobody does. Because what happens, of course, is that if you eat the wrong foods and you go from 2,000 calories to 1,500 calories, people say, oh, you're going to lose weight. You almost never do because they always say caloric deficit, but they're not understanding that if you eat 1,500 calories instead of 2,000, but your body goes from burning 2,000 to burning 1,500, you still haven't lost weight. And that's exactly what happens. We've shown this in study after study. Almost every study for the last 50 years shows the same thing. When you restrict calories without looking at the foods, without looking at satiety, without looking at all these ultra-processed foods, without looking at frequency of food, when you just restrict calories alone, what happens is that your body responds by burning fewer calories, in which case your caloric deficit disappears. So technically it's true. It's about a caloric deficit, right? And they always say, well, you're just denying science. It's like, no, you're just not understanding that what's important is not the calories themselves, but sort of what's going on behind the scenes. The foods behind, like you want to pretend that 100 calories of broccoli is equal to 100 calories of soda. In that they both have 100 calories, that's true. But look at it this way. Our response to the broccoli and the soda are completely different. Satiety effect, completely different. Effect on metabolic rate, completely different. So why would you say they're the same? Nobody gets fat eating broccoli, almost ever. So why would you say that that's true? So you got to get back to the foods. The reason the fitness people are so gung-ho, one, is that they are generally very fit themselves. So they want to use it as proof that they're better than you. And that's basically it. Their whole self-worth is based on the fact that they're fit. And therefore, they want that as proof that they have more knowledge and more willpower than you, and therefore they can sell it. And that's basically all. It makes them feel good about themselves. When they say, oh, it's all about calories, 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 what they're saying is that, look at me, I'm fit, so you must look up to me. That's it. It's a big ego trip for them, right? They don't understand the science behind it. Like, the body has no calorie receptors. So when you take 100 calories of cookies versus 100 calories of broccoli, the body doesn't know how many calories you're taking. The body only knows what happens once you eat, and that's the hormonal response, whether it's peptide YY, cholecystokinin, insulin, cortisol. That complex interplay of the hormones that are released in response to the 100 calories of cookies is different than the hormones released in response to the 100 calories of salmon or eggs or whatever you want. They're completely different. And all it means is that those two foods have different fattening effects. Cookies are more fattening than broccoli. Well, does that make sense? Yes, it does. Your grandmother could have told you that cookies are more fattening than broccoli. Like, come on. That's the only thing it means. It doesn't mean I'm denying that foods have calories and calories are not important and stuff. I'm saying some foods are more fattening than others. And they don't get that because they're so invested. Like, one, they've spent several decades in the field, and they're like, they've grown up on this whole calories, calories, calories thing. And the truth is that it hasn't worked. I mean, if counting calories was successful, I would be the first guy out here telling people to count their calories. Okay. But if you actually look at the success rate of counting calories, it's about 1 to 5%. That's the data. So somewhere between 95 and 90%, 99% of people fail to lose weight counting calories. So why would I recommend that as a strategy? How is that useful to my patient? If I recommend something that has a 99% chance of failure for you, you'd say, I want another doctor, please. And that's why doctors have sort of largely abandoned the field, because what we've been taught, which is mostly espoused by this whole calorie thing, and the fitness people are just the loudest because they have something to sell, which is themselves mostly. And they don't, and they've grown up on this whole calories thing, and they don't really want to relearn it. And of course, it would mean that their thinness and fitness is not proof of their, that they're better than you, sort of thing. And that's what's tiring to me. It's like, they're not really focused on helping people. Like, if they're focused on helping people, why recommend a strategy that we've been doing for the last 35 years, 40 years, right? I mean, it's clearly failed as a useful strategy for people. So why double down on it? It's like, the answer is because that's what they're selling. That's what they're selling. They're selling themselves, and their fitness, their thinness is proof of their mastery of it. But it's not. I mean, it's just that the whole debate is, there's not really even a debate. I don't even engage them because it's very hard to make any of them see the actual point of a lot of this stuff. They don't understand, hey, what you say, it's all calories. So you're saying that cookies are not more fat or are as fattening as broccoli. Or if you say, oh, you need to restrict or everything in moderation. So we should eat cookies in moderation the same way that we eat broccoli in moderation. I should moderate my broccoli intake. Is that what you're telling me? I don't think I need to moderate my broccoli intake. I don't think I need to moderate my spinach intake. And if you think I do, like, you're, who believes that, right? It's like, that doesn't even make sense. So yes, I mean, there are certain things to focus on, because when you start restricting everything, like, yes, you must moderate your intake of every single food on earth. It's like, well, that's a hard diet to follow. I'd rather just say, I can eat natural foods. I can eat, meat. I can eat eggs. I can eat everything there that is natural. What I want to moderate is the ultra processed foods, things that are, not natural, like cookies. They're not particularly natural. You don't have cookie trees.
You don't have cookie trees. I've never seen a cookie tree. I'm just going to offer an alternate viewpoint, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think that there's there's probably a significant selection bias within the fitness community. People who are obsessed with their fitness. So there's a high degree of motivation, of passion, of maybe even obsession for people in the fitness community. And these are people and as a result, these are people for whom tracking meticulously their macro and calorie intake isn't really that difficult. But the problem is that while that can work for pretty much anybody who follows it, it ceases to work the minute you stop counting. And your average person isn't going to be as obsessed or have built in the same feedback loops over decades of being involved in fitness, being immersed in fitness, as some of these fitness influencers. Some of the loudest fitness influencers have been doing fitness their whole lives. Some of them have even competed in fitness competitions. So that to me implies a level of obsession, and they make the mistake of falsely believing that the masses, the mainstream dieting population, is going to be able to be as invested in the tracking of calories as they are. And that's why I think it fails so consistently.
Problem is that, I think tracking calories is not difficult these days. There's tons of apps to do it. The problem is it's calories in versus calories out. And it's true. But calories out is mostly, for most people who aren't exercising a lot, is mostly basal metabolic rate. And there's simply no way to track that on a regular basis. Like, you can do expensive tests to measure your basal metabolic rate. And that's how many calories you're burning. So if you take exercise out of the equation, just for simplicity's sake, you can reduce the calories that you take in from 2,000 to 1,500. I have like hundreds of women mostly who have tracked it to a T. Like, they weigh every morsel of food. Then they put it into their app and they write down exactly how many calories they're taking. But they don't lose weight. Why? Because they go down to 1,200 calories that they take in on a daily basis. What they don't understand is that the amount they're burning also went down to 1,200. And they say, I don't understand. This fitness guru said I just need to cut my calories. But you didn't take into account half of the equation, which is that whole calories out part. It's not mostly exercise. And yes, if you do 6 hours a day, then probably you're going to be able to significantly impact that. We saw that on all those Biggest Loser studies, right? I don't know if you've read them, but they tracked the Biggest Loser contestants. They all lost a lot of weight, but the problem is their metabolic rates plummeted. So therefore, and they're tracking calories for the most part. So therefore, and they made up for it initially with sort of like 10 hours a day of exercise. But as soon as that dropped off, their basal metabolic rates never went up with exercise. It was continuing to go down, because you can exercise your muscles, but you can't make your liver burn more calories. You can't make your kidney burn more calories. You can't tell your body, hey, I want my body temperature to go up 3 degrees. That's all controlled by hormones, which is linked back to the foods that we eat. So you eat low calories of the wrong foods. Then what happens? You can track that. You can eat 1,000 calories. And I've seen people whose basal metabolic rates are like 800 calories a day. So they eat 1,000 calories a day. They're gaining weight.
Wow.
And the fitness people are like, oh, that's impossible. It's like, that's because you don't actually deal with patients. Like, you just want people to work out, which is great. Like, you can work out, that's fine. But the whole point is that unless you have both sides, the calories in and the basal metabolic rate, you don't know what's happening. Like, you try and create a caloric deficit, but you only see the input. You don't see the output. So how are you going to create a caloric deficit? You say you need a calorie deficit. Okay, but how are you going to create it? Because counting calories does not. Like, I don't have to prove that it doesn't work. Like, who doesn't know that counting calories doesn't work? Like, every single person I meet has done calorie counting, and almost everybody fails. So why do I need to prove that calorie counting doesn't work? I'd love it if it worked. If all I had to do was download an app and take a picture of my food and weigh it and stuff, and I'd for sure lose weight, I'd be the first one to do it. Why? Because it'll make them healthier if they lose weight. That's known. But the point is that it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then why you keep promoting it? So no matter what, all these fitness people are out there. It's all about calories, all about calories. Okay, so you took this sort of 40-year-old position that has clearly failed as the entire world starts to become more obese, and you're defending it against people who want to look at, calories in a sort of more broader context of hormones and satiety and energy expenditure and, basal metabolic rate. And you're saying that, that's false. Just make it simple and make it calories. It's like, but the world is not that simple. So, that's I think why a lot of these fitness fanatics are out there, because again, they pretend it's all in your control. Like it's just the foods, it's just willpower. It's like, no, it's not just willpower. There's a whole lot more that goes into it. And that's where a lot of these fitness people who say it's calories, they're in part responsible for a lot of the fat shaming that goes on, because by equating calories and with fatness with willpower, what you're saying is not that they're fat. You're saying that these people don't deserve respect because they have no willpower. And I don't believe that. I believe that they're doing something wrong. It's the knowledge that they got over, that we taught them. It's the knowledge that needs to be changed. It's the systems that need to be changed, like getting rid of easy to access foods, getting rid of ultra processed foods. It's the knowledge, not that there's something intrinsically wrong with them. When you say it's all about calories and therefore it's all about willpower and therefore your thinness is a reflection of you as a person, that's where the fat shaming comes in, because you don't respect these people because they're fat, because you think that indicates a character deficit. So while they're out there blustering, I think it's actually extremely dangerous for them to be talking about this, about that point of view, that it's all calories, all willpower. You just got to do it. It's like, you're not just wrong, but you're also fostering this entire sort of, it's okay to shame fat people because they did it to themselves sort of idea, which I find very distasteful. I mean, I think it's more that the knowledge has to come, like, other tools like intermittent fasting and so on need to be tried and so on, as opposed to that. So, that's why I have a problem with the calories sort of people. It's one is like, it just doesn't work. And two, it's actually super unhealthy for us to be talking about it in that way. It generates disrespect for people who don't deserve it.
You mentioned as one of your 5 pillars, the immune system. And, we've heard a lot about inflammation. Inflammation is a feature of the immune system. It's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. Can you talk to my audience a little bit about what inflammation is and maybe the foods that can help dampen inflammation in the body? Because we know that inflammation plays such an important role in the etiology of chronic disease.
Absolutely. So first of all, if we didn't have inflammation, we probably would have died as kids, because when we cut ourselves, on a swing set or, on building blocks or, a scuffle in the schoolyard or whatever it is, that cut that you get, when you fall off your bicycle, you skin your knee, what's the first thing that happens? You get a little bit of redness. It's painful. You get a little bit of redness, a little bit of swelling. That's inflammation. That's our body's natural first line of defense. And inflammation is just one part of our immune system. It's the front line, and it's designed inherently to get rid of bacteria that might enter the body if we actually are injured. So a little inflammation is really, really important. And what our body knows how to do is to ramp up the inflammation quickly, which is why when you cut yourself, you get that swelling within seconds, frankly, definitely within minutes. And then what happens over the course of a day or 2 days or 3 days, your body tones that down, turns the volume way down, and then turns it off. So inflammation is a defensive part of our immune system that our body turns on and then turns off. If you can't turn it off, you get chronic inflammation. And that's the problem that we see in chronic diseases. In diabetes, we've got chronic inflammation. In heart disease, chronic inflammation. Cancer, chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation triggers other diseases as well. It's kind of like, here's the analogy. We know that when humans made fire, we suddenly had the power to be able to warm ourselves and cook our food, okay? And we want to keep that fire in a little fire pit. And that's where fire was useful to us. And we know that, after the evening, you put the fire out, then you go out and forage or whatever it is. So turning it down at the very end. Now imagine if the fire doesn't go out. And worse, imagine the fire pops out of the fire pit and catches the forest on fire. Now you got the wildfire, right? And this is what's going on in our country right now. We got these raging wildfires going everywhere, destroying things. That's what happens. That's the inflammation we're really talking about. But I always try to point out to people, you don't want to eliminate inflammation. You want to kind of turn it way down. So what are some ways to turn down inflammation using food? Again, here's the science. It turns out that there's a lot of different food substances that can turn down inflammation. Green tea will turn down inflammation. Vitamin C, simple vitamin C, which is found in so many foods, can also turn down inflammation. So red bell peppers, strawberries, guava, tomatoes, oranges, citrus, of course, are great sources of vitamin C. I just gave you a handful of things you could sprinkle over the course of the day. Now, how do we know that vitamin C does this? Again, it's not theoretical. Like, that's one of the things that I try to bring to the table is, what happens in a lab is in a lab. It's like Vegas, stays in the lab. But what happens in people? Well, that actually makes a difference. And when you find it in the lab and in people, now you got my attention. Well, so studies have been done with people with inflammatory autoimmune diseases where they've got like runaway inflammation. And there was a study in Japan looking at lupus. So in the Miyagi prefecture in Japan, there's like this lupus center where, it's like a lupus out of control. And they found that people, women mostly with lupus who had this chronic inflammation, that those women who ate more vitamin C containing foods like guava, tomatoes, strawberries, those kinds of things, bell peppers, they had high levels of vitamin C and they had lower levels of inflammation as measured by CRP, and they had less lupus flares. That's human. That's feasible. And that can be delicious as well.
Yeah. So I have to ask, have there been trials to look at supplemental vitamin C, and have they seen the same results? Because I believe that study that you just referenced, it sounded to me like an observational study, right? So have they been able to tease that out and look at supplementary vitamin C?
So here's not yet to my knowledge, and here's part of the problem. Once you get to a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial approved by an institutional review board in a hospital, and you want to get these patients with lupus, the research is now changing. But the old school way, you're going to get people with runaway, out of control lupus at the end of their game, okay? And then they're going to also be on steroids, and they're going to be on all these monoclonal antibodies. And now you're not really studying kind of the real world anymore. You're taking the train wrecks, the worst of the worst, and trying to see if a vitamin is going to make a dent. I'm talking about people that, are living their lives normally, not in a hospital, and are just trying to get their stuff under control, right? And so that's where these observational studies are, to your point, they're important hypothesis generation. But the hypothesis should be tested, but the hypothesis is also easily tested by people as soon as they hear about it in their home that night after they hear about it. Food has immediacy. So what I would say is that we should all be eager to conduct our own clinical studies on ourselves if we think that there's a study and good science that actually points a finger towards a direction that we can actually get behind.
Yeah. One of the most, I think, typically when people think of inflammation and supplements that are commonly talked about, they think fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids. What are your thoughts on those as a potential anti-inflammatory intervention?
The fish oil has been studied as a supplement. And, I think that a large body of evidence is that it does have good anti-inflammatory benefits. it lowers CRP. It can improve arthritis symptoms of pain and swelling and lower medication needs. And it also seems to have some improvement in dementia in clinical trials, like prospective clinical trials. And they think it's by lowering inflammation as well. So again, yet another kind of, I would say, brick to put on this wall that what we eat can make a difference. But here's what I would tell you. Like, some people love to take supplements. I know people who, that's their thing. They want to take a bunch of pills in the morning and they feel good about them. And I'm okay with that. But if you can get the same substance from a whole food and get your protein and get diversity, because our bodies are designed for diversity. We're not one trick ponies, So if you can get omega-3 fatty acids from eating salmon, anchovy, hake, sardines, manila clams, I think that's great, because you're testing your body, you're stretching your body's repertoire of responding to the things we're putting into it in ways that activate your health defenses. And that's my own personal way of actually trying to get omega-3s.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you, because you're also getting all these other, as you mentioned, protein, but even on top of that, there's all these additional nutrients that are strengthening the entirety of the system. Take salmon, for example, loaded with astaxanthin.
And by the way, here's a cool piece of research that a lot of people don't know. Sea bass, which also contains omega-3 fatty acids, have been found by researchers in Guangzhou to actually contain they think it's a peptide, but it's in the meat itself, and only recently discovered that actually speeds up wound healing. And so they're like, that's a really cool idea. And that's, to me, scientists get excited by the unknown. A lot of people think that scientists spend all their time talking about all the stuff they know, the brainiacs. Actually, when you get a group of scientists together, like when I get together for dinner with my science buddies, it's not that we geek out talking about all the stuff that we know, like engineers, like we scientists, biology scientists, actually spend a lot of time talking about what we don't know. Yeah. Did you know what we don't know? Like, how would we answer this question? And that's what I would say is so exciting about food and health. We are really at the beginning of a new era of really being able to truly understand not only what's in our food, but how our body responds to what we put inside it. And metabolism is a whole other dimension of this that is coming down the pike as well.
Yeah, and we know it's so important, especially over the past year. Metabolism and metabolic health has really come into the spotlight as being something that we all ought to be conscious of. And unfortunately, so few are. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Fats also do not promote satiety the way protein does, for example. So I think if you're trying to feel a greater sense of satiety, go for whole foods, protein, things like that. Full fat Greek yogurt, chicken breast, chicken leg, which has a lot of collagen in it, actually very good.